created by the fact that the government is on a mission to dismantle the NHS, and they're doing quite well. You know, if there's one thing they're doing well, it is dismantling the NHS through a process of stealthy privatisation, while convincing the public that they're doing the exact opposite of that. Privatisation. Just a couple of points about privatisation. It's, you know, essentially profit, the motive to make profit, you know, the capitalist agenda, basically replacing patient care. You know, the duty of care that we have for our patients, it doesn't really seem to amount to anything when services are being whittled down, and the money that goes into private companies, you know, that stays into private companies. Whereas money that goes into the NHS is obviously recycled into the NHS. And this is why we're seeing such destitution in our services. I'm going to try and end on a slightly more positive note. You know, there's nothing inevitable about what happens next. The system isn't failing. The system is not designed to provide adequate healthcare for the majority of society. It's in fact designed to benefit a very small fraction of society. We now have the opportunity to reorganize society in a way that makes more sense for the majority of people. You know, it's more important than ever, really, to continue making demands on the government. We've seen, you know, significant U-turns driven by public demand. So we've seen that it's possible to create change from the outside of you know, party politics, quite frankly. You know, join campaigns, support campaigns, start campaigns. We've seen a campaign fronted by a footballer preventing the government from taking away free school meals, you know, for children in poverty. That's incredible. But, you know, we can do this. We've seen immigration policy, that horrible, you know, that makes it so difficult for people to access healthcare. It's become slightly less racist and awful. And that's because people have been pushing for that. Campaigns such as Keep Our Nhs Public it's managed to save some hospitals. It's managed to do some really amazing things, actually. Crucially, and I'll end with this, crucially, those of us who work in the NHS, we need to start getting more organised so that we can fight to defend the NHS and improve it from within, you know, by organising ourselves better, by pushing trade unions to fight more effectively. NHS Staff Voices has a conference on the 18th of July. If you work in the NHS, please join the conference.
I'm sure we could put a link to that, Alia, if that was provided on the comments. That we would happily do that. And your analysis is quite frankly staggering, and it's painful, and it is a motivator, isn't it? You know what you've just described, the levels of mental unwellness in young people. And then that not being matched with the help, you know, of course, you know, you will have, you know, much better understanding than me, and you know, you'll have studied mental health and wellness for a long time, and then worked as a professional in this field. But the system can really exacerbate those feelings of unwellness, the pressure, and then on top of it, austerity, and then on top of that again, you know, crushing poverty for many families, and on top of that again now a health pandemic. This is a very serious situation for many working class communities up and down the United Kingdom. And I just want to ask you this before I move to our next speaker, Ian Byrne. Why do you think there was not a real kind of national mandate for the NHS at the last general election? Do you think this was a failure of our campaigns? Do you think it was a power of other political priorities like Brexit? But your case there should not have seen a return Tory government.
You know, I do feel like there is an agenda. The government have an agenda, and you know, I'm not sure how much I should go into that.
Okay.
I do feel like there is an agenda, and you know, people are being confused, and we hear this term gaslight. You know, and it talks about, it's basically when we're experiencing something in particular, and you know, somebody else or you know, the other group of people are convincing us that what we're experiencing isn't actually happening. And I do feel like the government is, you know, constantly gaslighting us and telling us that, like, you know, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're trying really hard, and they say all these fantastic things, and they're lying. They're lying. They're basically lying. So That's how I feel, and I feel that they, what they had, the agenda that they did have for the NHS, or that was presented to us, it was incredibly disingenuous.
No, I completely agree with you. Just to let you know, the rally on Sunday is organised actually by Keep Our NHS Public, by We Own It, and by Health Campaign together, along with the People's Assembly. So a real broad coalition of people there in defence of the NHS. That's 3:30 on Sunday, so don't forget that, everyone. Before I move to Ian, share this live feed now. Just do it, because you're going to want to hear what Ian Byrne has to say. Ian is a comrade. He is the MP for Liverpool West Derby. He's also part of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs. Over to you, Ian. Oh, it seems like you are muted, but not muted.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Headphones not working properly. Well, what an 8 minutes that was, and I'm humbled to be here with proper frontline workers. And as an MP, I feel quite privileged to be on the same panel as both Louise and Ala. But for me, I want to talk about. I don't really want to go into the statistics as such. I want to talk about what I experienced when I was an organiser for Unite the Union. When I had a proper job before I was an MP, and it was going into hospitals and trying to organise outsourced cleaners from a multinational company, and it was a real eye opener for me about what we actually experienced within the hospitals, the fear of organising, of becoming organised trade unionists, of trying to fight for better terms and conditions. And it was that fear factor which has always stayed with me, and it was mostly women, migrant workers that we were trying to organise, and they felt as though at times it was hopelessness, and they felt as though they were at the bottom of the pile and treated as such, and it was difficult to organise in them circumstances. But the fighting spirit of the people is something that's always stood with me, and I think COVID has hopefully focused people's minds on what people like the cleaners in the NHS are actually worth, and what they actually do. So I hope there's been a perception change in society about job worth and what people are. When Priti Patel stood at the dispatch box and talked about low-skilled workers, you'd like to think that's now all being turned on its head. And for me, being, as I say, organising, there was one particular story which I'm going to relate to you. And every time I see Tory MPs clapping for the carers, clapping for the NHS, I always see a picture of Frida's face in my mind, because she was a victim of outsourcing. She was a victim of what they'd done to the NHS. And I'll just go over this. So Frida was a resident in West Derby, where I'm actually the MP now, and she was a cleaner with a company in the Royal Liverpool Hospital. It had been outsourced a few years back, and she lost her sick pay. So Frida then got cancer. She got lung cancer. So she had to go in for the operation. It was life or death surgery. So she goes in for the operation. Bearing in mind, she worked in the hospital as a cleaner. Everyone knew her. She'd been there for years as an NHS worker when it was insourced. So she goes for the operation. She comes out in recovery, no sick pay. She spirals into debt. And then after so many months down the line, she gets evicted. So she gets evicted from her home because of the circumstances. She simply got ill as a cleaner in an outsourced company with no sick pay. So then she recovers to a degree. She loses the house because of the debt. So she's then homeless. Then she gets to be a carer into the cancer. She's ended up sofa surfing. And her last days on this earth were actually, as I said, sofa surfing, terrified that she had to get back to work to get an income. And she passed away. And it was a woman who devoted her life to the NHS. But unfortunately, because of the ideology of outsourcing, she was a victim of that, and that's what I'm going to open. She was, because she may have recovered if she would have had sick pay and would have had the ability to rest and not worry about what was going to come down the line. So, for me, that's left a burning impression on myself. And anyone can can Google her. Frida Smith, her name was. She was a cleaner in the Royal Liverpool Hospital, and Unite done a campaign around Frida's story and about what the effects of outsourcing. So, when people talk, and you just touched on it, Laura, about in 2019 and focusing on what the NHS means to us. And Frida's story is something which I find absolutely so potent, it's so powerful, because for me that's what the Labour Party was going to bring to an end, which was the outsourcing, which was the privatisation, which was bringing it back in house. So I'm extremely passionate about that. But as I said, when you see the Tories outside clapping, I always think, you're behind. Well, you put rocket boosters under the outsourcing with Land Lease Act. So that's something which I wanted to share, and it shows my passion for the NHS. I'd like to thank all NHS workers who are actually on this call now for everything that they've done for us over the last 72 years and continue to do. Just 2 weeks ago, we had a real personal experience in my house, and my dad had an heart attack, and he was looked after so well by Ainsley and Broad Green Hospital. Fine, now we got a stent fitted, but the level of care in the middle of this COVID crisis is something which everyone will find normal, because that's what we expect of the NHS. But when it touches you on such a personal level, it really brings home how special it is and how lucky we are to have it. And my God, how we've got to fight for it, and we've got to keep it, and we've got to make sure that we don't lose it. And I think the big worry is we've got a number of potential issues coming down the line, which will potentially lead to real dangers. And obviously one of them is going to be Brexit, Trump's deal, what they want in a free trade deal with the UK. And I think we've all got to be extremely mindful of the fact of that. But just on a level, when we're talking now about where we are within COVID, I mean, we're seeing at the moment some of the effects of privatisation on the NHS. The supply line to PPE was privatised. The debacle of that. We're also seeing, and it's so it's so relevant as we speak now, what we're seeing in Leicester with the lockdown. When the absolute shambolic nature of the track and trace and Serco's ineptitude once more, and other privatised companies involved in that, and the government's ideology by actually doing something so important and outsourcing it when they could have used local health authorities. It's absolutely outrageous. It's a national scandal, and it's something which will cost lives and will resonate for a long time after this, because we're all going to face local lockdowns. Just on that, I pointed to We Own It, the campaign. They're running one now against Serco and the track and trace, and what the government have done with that. So if you want to get involved, I'd go online and get involved in the We Own It campaign. It's something which maybe you should do. Just on, there's lots we can talk about. We've only got 8 minutes. I think I've got about a couple. What have we got left now, Laura? I've got a couple of minutes left. I just want to really touch on what we've got to do moving forward, and with regards within the NHS. And my plea to NHS workers are: organise, join a trade union, get yourselves, as I said, organised, and move forward, fight for your terms and conditions, but use what we've actually got now with the public support. You've got the whole of the nation behind you. Let's use that, allied to the trade union movement, and make sure that you get terms and conditions which you should be getting. No wage freezes, no return to austerity. And that's what we need to be fighting for. And as a Labour MP, I'll be certainly fighting for that along with my colleagues on that side of the House. Solidarity, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ian. I've not got any doubt that you will be there in solidarity with those workers, and you are quite right to say that it sticks in your throat, to put it mildly, when you see people who are the architects of lots of the harm that we see out clapping for those workers working in extremely hard circumstances. I actually feel really affected by the story of Frida Smith. Like, that is an unbelievable story of a woman who has, through her death, exemplified everything that is wrong with this system, that she was not on a secure contract of employment, not the responsibility of that employer to keep her well paid so that she could recover and contribute again to the NHS, because of some cruel ideology that thinks a free market is better placed than public ownership is just typifies everything that we need to fight for. Because there isn't just one Frida Smith, if you like. She was a unique, amazing individual, but there are loads and loads of people, Ian said, thousands of people in the same situation, maybe not with the illness and the precariousness, but certainly with precariousness. And it is something that all of us worry about. What happens if we become unwell? How safe, how secure will our household be? Will our income be? And that isn't a civilized society if people have to have that kind of worry. Next, and finally, out of our contributors tonight, we're going to come to Dr. Louise Irvin. She's a GP and Secretary of Health Campaigns Together. I'm looking forward to listening to what you've got to say. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Laura. I was very, very moved by Ian talking about especially Frida's story, and it exemplifies the fate of many outsourced workers. Much NHS care has now been outsourced to private companies, and these workers were actually fundamental to the running of our NHS. We couldn't run it without our cleaners and our porters and our domestic staff and all the others, and they have ended up with in some of the worst situations you can imagine. So when we talk about fighting to defend the NHS, we're talking about all of the NHS staff, even those who are technically not employed by the NHS, but actually contribute to our NHS. Alia covered very well the kind of background. The years of austerity, a decade of austerity had left the NHS really ill prepared for the pandemic. It's not only that the NHS itself was underfunded and understaffed, under-resourced, but also, and the years of creeping privatization, but also beyond the NHS, austerity had impacted on the health, mental and physical health of the population. And we'd also seen cuts to social care, which really adversely impacted the most vulnerable people in our society, which in itself had led to tens of thousands of excess deaths over the last decade. So we had an NHS that was really, and a society broadly, that was really ill prepared for the impact of this pandemic. And we also know specifically that, the sickness, 2016, the pandemic exercise they did to prepare the NHS for a pandemic, which they knew was coming, was the findings were ignored. We didn't have the protective equipment, the ventilators, the beds, the staff to deal with it. And that meant that everyone was terrified, all healthcare staff, absolutely terrified of what would happen when COVID hit. And it did hit us, and we ended up with the highest excess death rates in Europe. So when the government talks about its success in managing it, I don't know what I feel really so angry. And the NHS staff have done amazingly well in those circumstances, and they've gone over and above beyond the call of duty, and many have given their lives for this. When we must, over 300 healthcare workers have died. It's very personal for me too, and I think when Ian told Frida's story, it just reminded me how important it is to tell those personal stories. So in my own family, 3 family members of mine have been hospitalized with coronavirus. My father died, my mother very ill but has recovered. My husband was incredibly ill, nearly had to be ventilated. And both my mother, this is in different parts of the country, both my mother and my husband talked about the fantastic care they got. They just saw how hard everybody's working, and they're so grateful for it. So, and I think when you see the clap for carers, I think that was really heartfelt. I think across the country, people have felt very, very grateful. But we do need to harness that that emotion and that love for the NHS and that respect to actually use that to rebuild the NHS going forward, and more broadly of other social public services, etc. But I'm talking just specifically about the area that I'm involved with which is the NHS. And what we're seeing is a government which not only, I think it's the same government, people say, oh, it's a different government now. It's the same, it's a continuity from the same government from the last 10 years that actually does not care about the NHS and is actually using this crisis, horribly using it as a way of actually shoring up the private sector. So they're given something like £400 million a month to the private sector to access beds, which are actually not even being used. These contracts are not open to any kind of public scrutiny, so we can't see what we're getting for our money. It's our public money. Meanwhile, those resources have been diverted away from the NHS, where it's so badly needed. Instead of using our very good but existing public health structure, which probably most people don't know about, but is there in the background, was always there. We've had public health specialists in every borough in every area of the country. I'm actually talking more about England, because I think, you know, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales have managed to preserve much more of this structure than England has. But in England, you know, we have, you know, our public health structure linked in with our local NHS services, linked in with local government and local authorities, linked in with GPs, was completely bypassed. And instead, hundreds of contracts were given to either cowboy outfits, frankly, or untried, untested big companies like Deloitte or Serco, who had actually never done any of these sort of tracing, testing, contact, you know, organising public health services. And we've seen the effect of that in Leicester. Can you imagine? Can you believe it? That the people doing the testing, Deloitte, it wasn't even part of their contract that they should inform the local authorities of the number of positive cases. How else can the local authorities act promptly to suppress increased spread and to prevent another spike in cases and in deaths? And this reflects the, I would say, criminal negligence of this government in the whole way it's managed the coronavirus epidemic, right from the very beginning, from its delayed lockdown to its failure to have a proper track, trace and quarantine isolate system, to its messing around with IT and apps and giving contracts to, I think it was Dominic Cummings' brother got a contract. But this is continuing. We're seeing it's almost like using a crisis to build up the private sector, which is ideologically what this government really believes in, rather than really looking at how they could build up and support our NHS and public services and local government services. And people have said, oh, don't be so negative, why are you always criticising the government? And I think the reason to criticise is not to score political points. I want to just come up with an analogy that I have in my practice as a GP, and all health workers do, which is a significant event analysis. When we do something really badly wrong, when somebody sadly dies or there's some really bad issue in our practice, we immediately get together and we analyse what's gone wrong in real time in order to change tack and do better and prevent that thing happening again. I think a public inquiry into the government's mishandling is going to be far too late. We should be looking now, inquiring now and challenging now its total mismanagement of the coronavirus epidemic in order to change tack. And one of the main things we've got to do is say, you have got to start supporting our NHS. It's great to clap, but it's more important to actually rebuild it. And I think one of the great things is we're all part of different movements. We're part of Keep Our NHS Public Health campaigns together, People's Assembly. We're part of our trade unions, all kinds of wider campaigns like We Own It. And I think we need to come together with a sort of common set of demands I'm sure we could all agree on. And, you know, it's properly fund the NHS, end privatisation and reintegrate it once more as a great public service, make sure it's properly staffed, and that includes paying our staff properly, bringing the outsourced workers back into the NHS. It's looking at issues like keeping the NHS out of trade deals. It's looking at social care and saying, why isn't social care a publicly provided service like healthcare is, free at the point of use. It's looking at issues to do like migrant charging and the hostile environment, and making sure that we genuinely have health care for everybody in this country. No exceptions, no exclusions. That's a fundamental principle of our NHS. So I'm sure I had a list here of important things. Yes, I think basically that sums up the issues we can all campaign on together. I'm really optimistic because I think what has happened is that people have really recognized the value of the NHS. And I think what we have to do is show that it's being undermined, but that's not inevitable, and that together, by fighting and campaigning, we can put pressure even on this government to actually reverse some of its policies and to actually invest in and support the NHS and public services. So that's what I'm hopeful for. We're having we're doing a candlelit protest, stroke vigil tomorrow night, where we're going to be marching from St. Thomas's Hospital to Downing Street with a candle for every person, every 1,000 people that have died. The excess deaths are about 65,000. And we'll read out the names of all the NHS staff who've died. And if people want to see, you have to register because it'd be a socially distanced protest. Please look at the Keep Our NHS public website. There's also events happening locally all around the country. And of course the rally on Sunday. So this is this is not just to mark the end of something, it's the beginning of something, I think, the beginning of coming together to agree on what we're going to fight back on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. Honestly, such brilliant contributions, two excellent ideas. I think the People's Inquiry in real time right now is an excellent idea. We have all of the experts within our movement, you know, public health officials, doctors, researchers. We have all of the people that we would need to do that. We would just need the access to some of the information that we could get. It is an idea. And obviously, I think as we emerge from this crisis, it's becoming increasingly clear that the extra parliamentary movement is going to have to deliver lots and lots and lots of the demands that working class people will have. And we are really an unbeatable force. All of the campaign groups that you just listed have huge reach, and combined all of our forces, it is incredible. I'm just going to read out some of the comments, and then I'm going to give you some questions, if that's all right, from people who are watching. So Frank has said NHS staff have sacrificed everything to tackle this pandemic, including their lives, and this government must ensure that when the clapping stop, it's not NHS workers that are made to pay for the cost of coronavirus. That would be the ultimate betrayal and an utter disgrace. I completely agree with Frank. No return to austerity 2.0. And Lex says it's clear the Tories are about getting rid of support for the poor, and potentially about herd immunity that's taken place right now, in their opinion. The question is, how can we explain to Tories that the poor have value and should be well supported? Let's get on to that. And David tells a really harrowing story about how doctors were brilliant and found pneumonia and told him it had caused a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in the lungs. He said he basically would have been a goner without the National Health Service. And in the United States of America, he guarantees he would not be here today. He just says, thank you so much to the National Health Service. We must fight to end outsourcing and privatization because lives literally depend on it. My own experience, my own family, you kind of might think you're in a position of comfort. People watching, lots of people on, let's not forget that, but you might think you are, and all of a sudden something can just happen in your life and you are suddenly completely dependent on all of the systems that people have fought for before. I went to bed one night and tragically, you know, my father had a horrific accident, and all of a sudden there were doctors, nurses, surgery, you know, and every expert surrounding him trying to sustain his life. I could never have predicted that. Nobody could. This is happening countless times across the nation. You do not realize what an unbelievable system it is until you have to interact with it and depend on it. And I know I will campaign and fight for the National Health Service as a commitment, and born out of absolute love for that service. I want to ask you now, because it is really difficult, isn't it? Imagine somebody sat in front of you and they're like, right, if it's a private company or an NHS delivered care, why does it matter? why are you getting all het up about who actually delivers the care? This is a common question, isn't it? We're trying to get to the root of the question here. What is wrong with privatisation? Let me start with Alia, because you've been sat patiently. What do you think is wrong with privatisation?
Oh, lots of things. I'll kind of repeat that first small point that I made earlier, but the main problem is that privatization is about making money, but and that is prioritized over the care that the NHS actually seeks, or at one point seeks to provide, and we're still having to rely on it. So it doesn't make sense for people to not be against privatization, because it is taking money out of services. That money is going into the coffers of private companies. It's not going back into the NHS. It's not, it's not being used to support the NHS. And this profit seeking can lead to a dilution of skills, to cheapen costs. They want to do everything as cheaply as possible, but they want to make lots of money out of it. So, the people who are working in private firms, like Louise said, these companies don't know what they're doing. They've never done this stuff before. The NHS has been doing this for a long time, 72 years, in fact. Do you know what I mean? The NHS knows what it's doing. It's put a lot of effort into what it does and how it provides healthcare. And it's very intricate, and it's very, very difficult to do what it does. These companies, they're not healthcare providers. Their primary goal is to make money. They're not interested. Privatization has let patients down as well, lots and lots of times. There's competition between companies and trusts. There's bidding wars going on. There are bidding wars going on. So this is about money, and it's really quite commercialized. It's not about healthcare. Lots of contracts that are for specific vulnerable groups. So mental health services, for example, 25% of mental health services are now contracted to private companies. What are the statistics? I can't quite remember, but like huge percentages, 80-90% of ambulance services, for example, they're run by private companies. And it's
which is incredible. You just never kind of know that. What decision did the general public take for that mass privatization to take place? And that's what I mean about the insidious nature of the privatization. I'm just wondering what Ian thinks about, like, why are you so politically against the privatization of healthcare, and why should other people be?
It's just witnessing it, as I said earlier, Laura, trying to organise within it, seeing the fear, seeing the race to the bottom. It is all about profit. They're not going to come in it the goodness of the heart, are they? So it's about extracting as much profit as they can. And often that falls on terms and conditions and a race to the bottom and getting rid of sick pay and everything that we've seen. And that's my experience of privatisation within the NHS, outsourcing. Also, when you see outsourcing within councils, it's the common theme is extracting profit. And obviously the people who take the hit most of the time are the people that are actually working in the organisation. And also it's detrimental to some of the patient care, what we see, because I think once you start introducing profits and the chase of profit into anything, but it's detrimental to what we're trying to do, which the NHS was built on, the foundations which it was built on. So for me, it's about moving it away from the competition element, the chase for profit, the ability to make money out of people's ill health, and it's about focusing on what we should be focusing on with the NHS, which is becoming a health service, which it is magnificently well. But my worry is, as we go further down this agenda, and as I said before, as we potentially go into Brexit, there's going to be many hurdles what we've got to cross. And I think Louise said before, about coming together collaboratively as a movement, trade unions, community groups, organisers, campaigns. There's a huge well of public support out there, which has probably never been greater. and we've got to make sure we seize the moment and we make sure that we reshape the NHS post-COVID and what it should be. And, we're making representations to the chairs of the trusts now about bringing the likes of the cleaning services within our hospitals back in-house. And I think politicians, everyone in a position to make them arguments, should be making them arguments very clear now and making them quite extremely strongly, and the Labour Party as well. And as I say, everyone that's got that ability to do that. But I will go back to what I said earlier. It's up to the people within there as well. Organise, the greatest thing you can do now is join the trade union, in my opinion. Trade union membership's going up and up and up over the last 4 or 5 months because we've seen the relevance of it. And I think that's just something which we should be doing. And also, as I say, linking into the campaign groups and everything else, Laura.
And I'm sure the Socialist campaign group of MPs would be happy to receive representation from those health groups too. Oh,
absolutely, open invitation. Get in touch with me, and we'll make sure that your voices are heard, and whatever support we can give, we'll give, and that's an absolute given.
Brilliant. Louise, I'd be really interested. You've worked in the health service for, I don't know, how many years have you worked in the health service?
I first started working about 40 years ago in the health service.
So tell us about what you think of privatisation. I do want to get some more questions in. So
yeah, I think there are 3 main arguments you can use to help to convince people that privatisation is harmful, not in a broad ideological sense, but just in terms of the kind of care they're going to receive. I mean, the first one is what Ian and Alia said, which is that there's a need to increase profits and therefore cut costs. And the main costs in healthcare are the staff. So inevitably you end up seeing staff cuts and downskilling, etc. And that does affect the quality of care. And one example I want to give you is Serco, which got one of the track and trace contracts. It used to have a contract for out of hours care in Cornwall. It lost its contract, partly for falsifying data, but also because at least one occasion, if not more, they only had one GP on call for the whole of Cornwall, which obviously GPs are amazing, but not that amazing. So basically that tells you something about what these private cowboy outfits are like. The second argument really is that it fragments care, it stops coordination. And I think the COVID crisis has exemplified how important it is that people coordinate with each other, different services for the primary care, GPs, hospital, local authorities. So when everything's fragmented, it just doesn't work so well. And thirdly, there's a huge cost just to running a privatized system because it's a marketized system. So there's all the tendering and all that stuff. It costs something like £5 billion a year just to run it. So that's money that could be going to frontline care. So I think those would be the 3 main points I would make to people.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Somebody has asked a question about how can we stop coronavirus in the workplace without full sick pay? Do you think, I mean, that is the direct question, but do you think there is a relationship between, I'll just come back to you, Louise, if that's all right, between those employment rights, those individual rights, and the propensity to be protected from the virus?
Yes, I think that it's really important that there is a full individual risk assessment for every worker returning to work done. And I think employers have to work, unions are all working on this. I read somewhere there's a coalition of about, I think 20 unions looking at a set of prerequisites for people to be able to go back to work safely, because it's people who have had public facing jobs that have been at the highest risk of getting coronavirus and dying of it. I think that's another reason for joining a union as well. And I think there's nothing wrong at all in insisting that this risk assessment is done. The way that the lockdown's been eased, far too much is happening far too quickly. For example, reducing the 2 meter distance to 1 meter, etc., etc. I think that workers need to demand that the priority should be safety. And it may be possible to get back to work in those circumstances. I do think the government has definitely missed an opportunity. By acting better, quicker, more promptly and correctly, and listening to the advice of especially public health specialists, we could have actually got on top of the coronavirus epidemic sooner, and we could have actually saved lives, and also we could have got back to something more like normal life sooner as well. So the fact that we're having prolonged problems and possibly local outbreaks, which will have to bring on more local lockdowns, and how long that's going to continue, and another second wave, is all down to the complete incompetence. So I think that's, sorry, I could go on about that, but specifically, yes, staff need to say, I insist on having a proper risk assessment and proper protection before I can do my job. And that's where your union can back you up.
And that the movement will step in. So by the movement, I mean like the People's Assembly, local groups and health groups and trade unions will step in. If we see that there is exploitation like that, there will be a defense of those workers, you know, for everybody that has to face that torrid decision of stay home, protect yourself from the virus, or go out and in the house but face destitution, or go out and meet the virus but be able to pay some of your bills. That has to be met by the movement with a campaign, with demand. I've got some more questions. I mean, somebody says that Boris Johnson, I haven't seen where this has been said, so I don't know, but it says, he said that any inquiry mustn't blame the NHS for pandemic mismanagement, and this person believes is deliberately sowing seeds in the public psyche with that comment to distract from the government's negligence. I mean, I'm sure some of that will be going on. I don't know if Alia, if you've seen any examples where kind of blame is being deflected away from government's mismanagement onto services.
Yeah, I suppose I can't really think of particular examples where blame is being passed on, but I think the government have, I mean, Boris Johnson in particular has, you know, he habitually says ridiculous things that do create, you know, that they kind of create these images in the minds of, you know, common consciousness, really, like people listen to the government, you know, they do, they look to the government. They look to the government for guidance. We know that, you know, and the kind of changing from, and I suppose this is maybe an example, the changing from stay home, save lives to, you know, I don't know, stay alert, dance or something ridiculous like that. It's so kind of ambiguous, and it's just so like, and it does kind of allow for the blame to be passed away from the government, because,
or even certainly, did you see that tweet that the HM Treasury Twitter account put out? I think it's since been deleted, but it said pubs are opening on the 4th of July, raise a glass. And it was like, it was just people were coming out and say this is so irresponsible. As Louise said before, if you talk about excess deaths of 65,000 people couched in the language of success, celebrating pubs opening, I've got close family members who manages a pub and is worried about how do you keep people safe in that kind of environment, how do you prepare for that kind of opening. Very, very difficult, but to kind of almost encourage it. And I think at the People's Assembly, for everybody listening, before I go to a final round of questions to these brilliant panelists, we just want to drive home the message that it isn't the people's fault if there is a second wave. All of the messages that have come from the government have been about lifting the lockdown, at the same time stripping back provision to allow people to keep themselves at home and keep themselves safe. So let's not get into this blame game. Let's not judge people for standing outside a Primark to get some clothes that they might be able to afford. Let's put the blame on the government for opening shops that non-essential shops. This is not the fault of the individual doing the best they can in the situation and the environment that they've got. These are centrally driven decisions on furlough, on health and safety guidance, on the protection that people get. I want to come to a kind of final rally call, if you don't mind, from with all of your expertise and all of the different things that you have done. We are hopefully, with the help of the movement, going to see another 72 years of the National Health Service. But that is not a given. So what are the priorities for the movement? What are you going to be calling on people to do? We are obviously going to celebrate the existence of the National Health Service with all our personally held love, adoration and gratitude for it, and thanks to the kind of heroes who fought before. But what are the political demands that we must be making as a movement? Can I come to you first, Alia?
Yes. So the rally that is taking place this weekend is going to be launching the 2020 kind of, what we want things to look like, and there are demands that will be presented in the rally. So it's really important that people go, that people go along, tune in, and find out what's happening and find out what we are thinking about. But the very basic demands, unfortunately, are still having to be made. That staff are paid properly, that staff are treated, that staff have a safe environment to work in. Unfortunately, we're still having to make demands for PPE. There isn't adequate amount, PPE isn't available for all staff. Testing is really important. The example I gave earlier about the government, voting against testing for frontline staff, it's these kinds of really basic things that we are still having to demand for, make demands for. And it is really important that the public support that, because without that support, these changes won't happen. As we know, the government are not interested. I think the comment made by somebody in the audience, that there is a problem with the way that working class people are portrayed. And also, look, the example you gave, Laura, about people going about their everyday lives and being vilified for it. These are strategies to make people think ill of working class people and people who are actually working really, really hard. So we do need that support from the public to kind of join these campaigns, join Keep Our Nhs public, join the People's Assembly, and find out in your local area what is going on and how local campaigns can be supported. And please do join them and make a fuss about these very, very basic demands, such as sick pay being made available. As we've seen, that's so integral to people being able to say, actually, I'm not well and I don't want to infect people. I don't want to become further, unwell. I don't want to potentially infect my patients. All of this stuff, it's really quite interlinked.
It's basic, and you're right to remind us, Alia, that we have to look to the next 72 years, but we have to be there for workers right now who are demanding PPE, who are asking that they are protected. And whilst the kind of public mood might have gone off that issue, the issue is still there. So that is a extremely pertinent reminder. Ian, what are you saying to people about the next 7 generations hence? How are we gonna, what are we fighting for? How are we going to protect the NHS?
Well, I think we've got to fight for it or be a loser, as a famous person once said. Just on the short term, what the NHS workers have been doing over the last 4 months is beyond belief, and the recuperation process that they're going to need. I implore the NHS to make sure that everyone gets the help that they need to get to recover, just in case we do, and you alluded to before, Laura, a second wave potentially maybe upon us even quicker. But I do worry about the sustained efforts that have been put in over the last 4 months and how tired they must be and how draining and what they've actually gone through with the amount of deaths that we've seen. I've spoke to frontline workers in my constituency and, they're tired. So that's a great worry. And also it ties into the government's relaxation of lockdown and what we're seeing. That tweet was just beyond the pale, wasn't it? With regards to everyone go out and, get sloshed the weekends and we're still fighting what we're fighting. But for me, it's I've alluded to before, we've got to come together. We've got a huge movement. We've got to be united. We've got to show unity with each other. We've got to come together with a common purpose. And on this, it's defending the NHS and make sure it's there for our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, because as I alluded to before with my dad, if we didn't have that, we were in somewhere else, well, he might have passed away. So, there's so much to fight for, because it really is the difference between life and death for millions of people. And that's what we need to do with a civilized society. And this is our greatest achievement, in my opinion. And it's one of the greatest achievements that socialism delivered. We've got to nurture it, cherish it, fight for it, and make sure it's there in all its imperfections, fight for them imperfections to get weeded out. And that's what we've got to do. And that's my challenge to everyone.
Thank you so, so much, Ian. And the last word is to you, Dr. Louise Irvin.
Thank you. So I think there are two immediate challenges. One is that the COVID epidemic, it's still there, and we could crush COVID now with proper management of the problem. So we should not be easing lockdown the way we are. We should be continuing to support workers who cannot go back to work, or make sure it's safe for them to go, the ones that do have to go back, until we have a proper test, trace and isolate system in place. It can be done. It's been done in other countries. We could do it here. So that's an immediate demand we should be making. In the longer term, the next 72 years, I think the way the NHS staff have performed has been so amazing that people maybe think, oh, the NHS is really resilient. But it's been at a cost of actually stopping nearly all other NHS work. Any other conditions, chronic conditions, even cancer care, long-term conditions, etc., have just been suspended. So it's still in a very precarious state, and we have to explain that to people, because we're going to see there's going to be 10 million people on the NHS waiting list by this December, which is up from 4.5 million, which is already bad enough last December. So, you know, we do have to get the message over. The NHS is vulnerable, it's precarious, it's been badly mismanaged for at least the last 10 years. And the kind of demands, well, Alia really summed them up, but I mean, just to say that things like properly fund the NHS, restore effective public health, mental health, community services, support staff, pay them properly, support them properly, protect them properly, bring people back in from the outsourced services, reintegrate our NHS, get rid of the market, get rid of privatisation, healthcare for all, end migrant charges, restore universal care, keep the NHS out of trade deals, and then go further and demand a radical reform of social care as well. These are the kinds of demands that are emerging. But this, Alia mentioned the 2020 vision for the NHS, which Health Campaigns Together is launching at the rally. And it's a draft, it's open, it's going to be published. We want to hear what people have to say, and people can contribute. And there might be things that we've missed out or not, you know, that we could develop further, so that, you know, we want to have that big conversation, and out of that crystallized out the main things that we should all be fighting for together. And I think we do have a very strong movement, and we also have amazing support in the public. So I think we've got all to play for. I think we can win.
I say, you've heard it here from the people definitely in the know. There is a future for the NHS, and it is in our hands. And I am so grateful. Ian's kind of behind the scenes showing his gratitude to both Louise and Alia, but I am grateful to all of you for your contributions. And please remember that rally on Sunday. If you are well enough and to go on a socially distanced vigil, then fine, there is registration details for that. If not, or if you just don't want to, you can join the virtual rally on Sunday, where all of those groups that I've mentioned will be represented, having their say. The choice is in our hands. As I've said, we are not going to stop fighting for the NHS. There is just absolutely no doubt about that. The People's Assembly really need your support, and it can have your support in two ways. Share this post, like the People's Assembly page. We are so nearly at 100,000 likes on our Facebook page. It would make our team so happy. If you just invite a few people to like the People's Assembly page, that would be amazing. I'm just going to read out that donation number just one more time. Don't go away just yet. You can text donate to 07947 865875, and you'll get a call back from one of our team to make a donation. All of your I've just read out the wrong number. Start again. Do not text that number, right? I don't know who you're going to get if you text that number. That's not the one. Here's the donate number. It's 075941 35666. Okay, that's the right number. And we thank you very much for anything that you have if you do donate. Thanks for coming back every single week. Thank you so much. Keep the faith, and love and solidarity to everyone watching. Thanks, everyone.